Hi, it's Dave T here, and way back in early 2021 I decided to make several upgrades to our caravan to make it more capable off-grid. The very first upgrade was actually a Victron SmartSolar controller, which has enabled me to capture daily records of the solar power we used. So in this video I'm going to run through the changes we made and what worked and also what didn't. So before I get into the details, I'll just point out that we use our caravan for holidays and are by no means full-timers. We typically get away for about 30 nights or so a year, which I'm guessing is typical to the high side for most caravan owners. I also create films of each site we visit, which hopefully will make the run through of the data more interesting, and I'll link to the videos as we go along. I will also link to specific videos on the installation of certain devices as I cover them here. So we start our story with the installation of the Victron 7515 MPPT smart controller. This has Bluetooth connectivity and can record data such as yield and max-min battery voltage for 30 days. Every month I have connected to the controller and emailed myself this data, which is what will be used in this video. The controller itself has performed flawlessly, and the Bluetooth connection makes it easy to view current solar generation without actually getting up. The fact that it is an MPPT controller means that it is almost certainly making my panels more efficient, but unfortunately I don't actually have any comparable data to prove that, so we'll just have to rely on the theory. The next upgrade about 3 weeks later was to the KS Energy 60 amp hour lithium battery, which was potentially the most contentious product choice since it was actually replacing a 110 amp hour lead acid battery. Now this did save some money, but the real deciding factor was that we were limited in the battery space due to the underslung battery compartment on our caravan. The theory was that the 90% usable aspect of the 60 amp lithium battery would exceed the 50% usable capacity of the old lead acid. Also, by going for a smaller battery we saved about 13 kilos of weight. It was therefore a bit of a gamble, but spoiler alert, the data for us at least shows that it was actually the right decision, since we rarely went below 60% capacity. We did drop below 20% on a couple of specific occasions, but there was an explanation for those which will be revealed later on. The Bluetooth features gave a useful second view of charge state and output, and recorded that the battery has actually been through 18 notional cycles of discharging its entire capacity. It's worth noting that when people talk about lifetime of batteries in cycles, a cycle will always be measured between two set values, such as 100% down to 10%. So when a leisure battery is taken from fully charged to half charged, then it is very roughly half a cycle, but certainly not a full cycle. The KS battery is rated at 5,000 cycles, going between 80% and 30%, so it should last quite a while yet. The KS's frost protection circuit meant that there was little worry of accidental sub-zero charging, especially with the storage charge profile that I set up on the controller, but I'll talk about that later. Not long after installing the lithium battery, I also installed the Victron SmartShunt. This gives an accurate reading of the battery's remaining capacity as well as incoming and outgoing current. The shunt was probably the only part of the upgrade that was actually unnecessary, or as my wife would put it, a waste of money. Basically, the Bluetooth functionality of the KS Energy battery provides the similar functionality to the shunt, making it a surplus to requirements. However, I was aware that this would be the case before I purchased it, and I had two specific reasons for buying the shunt. The first of which was because I wanted to make a video about shunts, and the second was that I hoped that the shunt would pass battery level data to the history memory of the smart controller. Sadly, the shunt doesn't actually do that, so on balance it wasn't really worth it for me. However, if you are installing a lithium battery which does not have Bluetooth connectivity, then I definitely would recommend getting a shunt. The next big change was adding an additional 100 watt solar panel to the roof, taking our total solar panels up to 200 watts. This involved changing the cable from the charge controller to the battery to a thicker cable to handle the additional current. According to the data, the highest wattage we actually achieved since the upgrade was 181 watts. 181 watts equates to about 13 amp charge rate, which is one of the reasons for the lithium upgrade, as LiFePO4 batteries can accommodate higher charge rates when the solar is available. Incidentally, I installed the additional panel in series for various reasons, and overall I don't think this has caused any issues apart from possibly when I accidentally stayed in, believe it or not, the Sahara Desert, but more about that later. Due to lockdowns, our first trip away was not until the end of April, when we visited Little Tidebrook Farm in East Sussex for 3 nights. The weather was generally overcast with no spectacularly sunny days, but the system worked well, generating 970 watt hours overall. The lowest the battery reached was about 60%, and generally it was fully recharged by about midday. On the last day at Tidebrook, I decided to test out a theory that I'd had and create what I refer to as a storage profile for the battery on the Victron Smart Controller. This in essence lowered the voltage at which point the charge controller would consider that the battery requires charging. By changing over to the storage profile the evening before leaving site meant that the battery would naturally be run down to about 50 or 60% and then not really be recharged unless it was dropped much lower or that I changed the profile back. Whilst it's not an essential rule to follow, lithium batteries will last longer the less time they are kept at full charge. This strategy worked perfectly by keeping the battery at or around half full when not in use, but never letting it drop too low, for example if I accidentally left something on in the caravan. The next trip away was for 5 nights in late May with glorious sunshine for most of the trip. The trip saw the second highest yield at 680 watt hours in one day. It's worth bearing in mind that the yield from the solar panels is based very much on how much power is used, or to put it another way, solar panels will stop generating power when there is basically nowhere for the power to go. Typically, after an evening watching TV, etc., our battery would be at about 60% or so by sunrise. It was then recharged by mid-morning, and so the panels generated little energy after that. Whilst at Buttercup Farm, I made a point of actually charging up numerous devices that I had with me, which explains the higher yield. On the 1st of July, we went away to Little Lodge Farm in Thetford Forest, and on the 2nd of July, we hit our highest ever daily yield of 750 watt hours. Again, this is dictated by what we used, and in this case was boosted by the fact that we set off for Thetford at around 6 PM in the evening and only changed the charge profile as we left. So most of the 2nd of July's yield relates to bringing the battery back up to full charge from a much lower starting point. Incidentally, the trip saw the first outing of the secondary panel connection that I made for my friend's van so that he could connect a secondary 60 watt panel to boost his existing 100 watt roof panel. To those that say you cannot mix panels, this outing proved that if done correctly, you can, and at times he was actually generating more energy than I was because he could angle the ground panel directly at the sun. For the first stop of our main summer holiday, we went to Furze Farm Estate near Louth, which actually has electric hookups. For this stop, I actually deliberately disabled the mains charger in the caravan so that all 12 volt systems were running purely from battery and solar. We did use mains power for watching TV and of course things like the water heater and fridge. This accounts for the lower than usual solar yield of 230 watt hours average per day and a total of 1150 watt hours over the stay. We then moved on to the off-grid site of Grange Farm Bungalow near Scarborough, Yorkshire, where the views were spectacular but the weather was mixed. Being off-grid raised the average daily yield to 300 watt hours and a total of 1500 watt hours over the entire 5 days. The last of our 3 summer stops was a further 5 nights at Dowry Farm near Oakham, where again the weather was mixed, but as with the other sites we never went below 60% capacity on the battery. Average daily yield was slightly higher at 322 watt hours and a total of 1610 watt hours over the entire stay. We had been trying to get to Chelsea Grange Farm for several years, with our bookings repeatedly having to be cancelled due to lockdowns and on one occasion a dental emergency. When at last we did reach this very lovely site, the weather was very much on the turn. This, coupled with me accidentally forgetting to change the charge profile when coming out of storage, meant that we set out with the battery already at about 50%. The intention was to use electric hookup but as before disabled the mains battery charger. However, with the battery low and the sun not great, I decided to top up the battery by turning on the mains charger for a couple of hours. This actually was a useful test, as firstly the charger certainly did work and charged the lithium battery at a rate of about 18 amps. This is just about within the standard charger's operating limits, as it has a maximum output of 20 amps. I did hear what I'm fairly sure was the cooling fan for the charger, which was not a problem or surprising at that charge rate, but I am pretty sure I've never heard this before. This is a pretty good test that lithium can actually be charged with the standard charger that's built into most caravans. I did disable the charger again when the battery was about 90% full, and I suspect the charger would not have had the voltage to push the battery capacity much further. This might sound like a problem, but if you consider the use case being that we were on site with electric hookup, then there was no real need to have the battery at 100%. The solar was more than enough to actually add the additional 10%, and the battery didn't drop below 50% for the rest of the stay just using solar. With winter coming, I decided to actually create an additional charge profile with a slightly lower target voltage from the storage profile, which made it well below the battery's 50% voltage. This ensured that the battery would either not charge at all or at least much less frequently. This was also an added protection against charging whilst temperatures were below zero, even though the KS Energy battery does already provide temperature sensors that block sub-zero charging. And you can see on the charts here that when we're not actually away in the van and it's on a storage profile, the battery stays at 50% and the charger puts very limited current into the battery. Our first trip of 2022 was actually delayed due to the storms that hit the south of the UK in early March. When we did finally get away to Redlands CL in Suffolk, we had an issue but didn't realise it until we were about to leave. Redlands does actually have electric hookup, so like previously at Chelsea Grange, we used mains for high power items such as heating, but left the charger turned off. This time the profile had been changed and we were at 100% at the start of our 2-night trip. Because it was sunny and we had access to mains hookup, I wasn't really paying attention to battery levels. So you can imagine my surprise when, as we were about to leave, I checked the battery and found that we were actually down to just under 20%. For a while I had concerns that there was a serious issue, perhaps even a battery failure, but the answer was actually much more simple. A week or so earlier, we had been hit by the fallout from the Sahara storm, and the solar panels were basically coated in sand deposits. You may remember that earlier I mentioned that the choice to wire the panels in series may have caused one issue. Well, this was the issue. Where one of the panels had a significant collection of sand in one area, pretty much obliterating a string of the panel, that and the combined general covering of sand had a very significant effect, impacting the performance of the panels. The total solar yield for the 3 days over our stay was a measly 690 watt hours, despite pretty damn good weather, and 430 of those were actually on the last day when I had realised the issue and cleaned the panel on arriving home. That's why I always carry this telescopic squeegee with me, which I can reach the panels to clean them by standing with my head through the hatches. Our final trip before making this video was to the off-grid site of Amberwood in the New Forest. This was a 6-night stay in typical April weather with some sunshine but plenty of overcast weather and a few days of rain. With the solar panels now clean, the system performed well and the lowest the battery reached was about 60%. So now, after 400 days of ownership, it's time to answer that question: was it all worth it? Well, the simple answer, for me at least, is a resounding yes, but let's break it down a bit further. If you look online, there are lots of people asking how much solar and what battery capacity they require. Obviously, these questions definitely come into the category of how long is a piece of string. There are so many variables for usage, solar generation and storage capacity that it really is a difficult, if not impossible, question to answer. That's why I created a spreadsheet that modelled all 3 of these things and predicted battery capacity over time. That spreadsheet, which actually you can access online by the way, told me that I needed a balanced system with more solar and just a little bit more battery capacity. It predicted that daily usage would be just over 50% of available capacity, and that 200 watts of solar would be sufficient to replenish that. As it turned out, that prediction was pretty much spot on, so the reasoning at least was sound. The solar upgrade, including the panel, new charge controller and related cabling, cost almost exactly £300, with me doing the work myself. I may have been able to get away with using the existing controller, and there are certainly lower cost ones than the Victron Smart Controller. On balance though, I think the cost is reasonable to give us confidence in adequate off-grid power. I could have saved some money and effort by adding a ground mounted panel instead of roof mounted, and ground mounted panels are generally more efficient, but to be honest, I wanted to try and reduce the setup time when we went away. The lithium battery is a bit more nuanced in its value. We paid £439 for the KS Energy 60. The equivalent in terms of usable capacity is a 108 amp hour lead acid battery. The price of the lithium compares with about £100 or so for a lowish cost 100 amp hour lead acid battery, or about 200 for an AGM. So it needs to last 4 to 5 times as long to pay for itself. We've had several lead acid batteries fail on us over the years, and typically they last about 4 years, but during that time they are losing capacity. They can of course last much longer with a lot of TLC, but from past experience we've found that it is very easy when staying off grid to get into situations where we are pushing the limits of the battery. Lead acids are far less tolerant to this kind of abuse, and contrary to what a lot of people say in the comments, LiFePO4 batteries actually have a simpler care regime than lead acids. The lithium is less than half the weight of the old battery, which more than compensated for the additional panels etc. and makes maintenance much easier on my back. So for us, I'd say that the lithium choice was marginal, but still a good one. Had we needed to increase our capacity to, for example, double what the lead acid was giving us, then the weight saving alone compared to two 110 amp hour lead acid batteries would have more than been worth it. The shunt, as I mentioned earlier, was an additional extravagance for us, but was worth getting just to make the video, and as I say, I would have required it were I not to have purchased the KS Energy with the Bluetooth option. So in conclusion, we are very happy with the upgrade, and it has made staying at off-grid sites less of a concern, especially in early or late season. We typically spend about 20 nights a year on off-grid sites, and they are generally speaking about £5 to £10 a night less than sites with hookups. That means we could in theory save £100 or £200 a year. To be honest though, I mainly enjoy off-grid sites because of their more remote and unspot locations. The whole exercise of researching and making these upgrades has taught me an awful lot, which in itself is a good reason for actually giving it a go. I hope this video has helped you, and if you have enjoyed or found it useful, please hit that like button. And if you're interested in seeing other videos I make, then please consider subscribing to my channel. But most of all, thanks for watching.